First of all, thanks for joining us this morning, everyone. It's early for some, probably later in the day for others. But again, thanks for joining us. And thank you to Stephanie for getting us up and running on this webinar. And today we are going to be talking about database tips and tricks, strategies for detecting and handling schema drift. Our goal here today is to guide you through a series of challenges and solutions around identifying and correcting schema drift using FME. If you have ever had to deal with source or destination schema changes disrupting your workflows or consuming time in your day, FME has really powerful tools across our data integration platform for dealing with these issues. So my name is Annabelle Glass, and I'm a product owner for the desktop authoring team here at Safe Software. And today I am lucky enough to be sharing the virtual floor with Brian Pont, who is the manager of our customer success team, and Dale Lutz, who is the co-founder of Safe Software. They will both be walking us through some scenarios and demos that address schema drift challenges. And behind the scenes, we also have Mark Ireland, who is our community champion and all-around FME expert. And he'll be available here for your questions and answers. We really want this to be an interactive and engaging experience for you. So please do share your thoughts, questions, comments in the question panel at any time. So the roadmap for this morning is going to look a little bit like this. We're going to dive into the definition of schema drift and why it's vital to identify and control for it before shifting into part 2, which is where we will begin sharing FME-based guard strategies and demonstrations for source schema drift handling. With our first guard strategies in mind, we will then tackle part 3, which will focus on guard strategies for destination schema drift. And then building on our playbooks from the first part of the webinar, we'll look at designing resilient workflows from authoring through to automation that build on the guard strategies we discussed earlier. By the end of this webinar, you will have several playbooks and tools to build and automate workflows using FME that are robust against schema drift, so you can save time and frustration in your day-to-day data integration tasks. So we've talked about schema drift quite a lot already, so let's define it for those of you who may have not heard this term before. Schema drift is defined as a change in the source or target data definition in your workflow. For example, you might say, and now they've gone and added yet another column to my Excel worksheet, so my workflow is broken. This schema drift madness has got to stop. If this sounds like something that's happened to you before, then you're definitely in the right webinar. So what is the challenge here? The data you're given keeps changing. How do you detect it, react to it, and provide robust solutions for it? If schema drift isn't handled properly, this can result in brittle and error-prone data workflows, which lead to poor data quality, time spent troubleshooting where the change occurred, and frustration and headaches. So what's the solution here? Data professionals should design their workflows to detect and handle schema drift. The results are resilient workflows that can manage any changes. You can set it and forget it, which I think is quite a nice segue into talking about the FME data integration platform. From day one back in 1995, FME, or Feature Manipulation Engine, as it was called, for those trivia fans out there, it was architected to solve challenges around schema changes. It is at the core of what we do. Today, we have a data integration platform for handling these challenges. From FME Desktop, where you author and design your workflows, to FME Server and FME Cloud, where you can automate the deployment of these workflows using schedules, event triggers, or custom automation patterns to keep both your data and your stakeholders up to date. So we talked a little bit about schema drift, but just to get very back to the basics, what exactly is a schema? If you're a database professional, this is likely a term you think about daily, but for those who may not be familiar, a schema, which is sometimes known as a data model, can be described as the structure of a data set, or more accurately, a formal definition of a data set's structure. If you've worked with FME before, you've likely heard some of these terms listed here: feature type, attribute, attribute data types, and geometries like points or lines. These terms all have analogs in the world of data models. Feature types could be things like table names or sheet names. Attributes are column or field names. Attribute data types could be things like integer or float or date. So with all of that preamble and this lead up and definition exploring, this is the time that I will hand off the controls to Dale Lutz to walk us through our first set of schema drift scenarios in FME. Over to you, Dale. And I think Steph might pass the torch.
I passed it over. Dale, it looks like you're muted still.
Yes, and I couldn't unmute while that other dialogue was up. So here we go. Yes, there we go. So thanks, Annabelle, for that good introduction to this topic. You know, I will mention that although SAFE has had tools in our FME product for many years to deal with this problem, we never had really known the term that that there was to kind of grab it all together into one package. And so recently in some research we were doing, Megan, Annabelle, and I came across this term and thought, you know what, we should put together a webinar that really addresses and tells people the work we've done over all these 20 some years of making FME to help with this problem. So I'm going to go through a set of scenarios and solutions around, first of all, setting up the problem and then showing you how you can set up workflows to cope with this. So, and this is a graphical representation of a workflow, the way we design it in Workbench, and I'm going to go show that in a second. We're going to go ahead and load a database from some customer, it's actually some business owner data, and then we'll get another update file, and as the question asks, what could possibly go wrong? So let's go over to Workbench and see. So this is FME Workbench, our tool that is really the place where data flows are authored. And I'm going to go a little off-roading. The rest of the team's going to be scared to see this and just show you. I'm starting with a blank canvas. And the way I would set up a workflow is I'd go and I'd add a reader. And conveniently enough, it remembers that I wanted to do CSV. But we should go ahead and look at that data first, as I got a nice directory here. Here's some files I've prepped, and this business owner's one CSV, there you can see it. It's got a number of columns in it, and we can see Jasmine, Jack, and Josie are our first three, and there's a bunch of other records. Incidentally, where to get this data? If you ever need to generate data, there's a website called Mockaroo that is very handy. Together with, I merged it actually with some actual businesses locations in Vancouver. So anyway, that's the data that we have, and I'm just going to add that to my canvas. And so then we get to see our input just like this, and I can go ahead and add a writer. And I'm going to go to Postgres today because why not? But I could go to any of our more than 450 formats, although many of them wouldn't make sense. Of course, going to a raster image wouldn't make sense, but Postgres seems as good as anything. Ahead of time, I've set up a connection to a database that's out in Amazon somewhere, and these things all look good. And I will say that I'll copy my definitions from the reader. And here we go. And so there I get a table ready to go inside of Postgres, and I can connect this, and I would rename this to something like business licenses. I would look at my user attributes. If I wanted to fiddle with the schema, this is where I would change that. On the parameters, I would also say, you know what, let's always drop, in this case for an initial load, I will drop whatever table was there and create it. And so, but I have some troubles there with my attribute names all needing underscores. And so then I would manually map these across if that was what I was doing. But you know, I'm not actually going to run that one because last night I set up another one that I like better, where the names don't have any of the underscores in them. And so this is the same one, set to drop and create, and I'm going to go ahead and run this. So this should do an initial load. And again, we're going to read that nice CSV data. And the translation's successful. Nothing's as exciting as looking at the log file. And I can use some FME techniques to see my data before. So I have what's called caching turned on so that it keeps a copy of all the data at each step. And if I look at these little icons and click them, that shows me what was going on. So Jack, Jasmine, and Josie, and they're at the top of the list. And if I go and look at the business licenses out there, I can hit this button here right above it that says view written data, and it will go and actually go out to that database. I could use PG admin or some kind of Postgres tool to see the data, but there we go. And I can see all these the data, and actually it has a map even of where the stuff is, and that's pretty nice. So that's my initial load, and I'm going to get rid of that now. And now I'm going to use another workspace that's set up to do the update. And the only difference with this workspace is that I've set it to say update in this operation, and I'm going to say that the license number is the key. So I'm going to read an input file, and Brian has prepped an input file for me. Thanks, Brian. And I think it's this one that's called updated business owners. Let's take a look here. Yes, thanks. And so really we have some ownership changes of those first 3 licenses that start with the 00. Looks like Zach, Zoe, and Zadie seem to have taken over. And so what I want to do is make sure I am pointing at, I'll just change this to make sure that it's going to that updated business owners CSV file. Indeed it is. And so I'm going to go ahead and, I can look at that file ahead of time by just hitting that button. Yeah, there they are, Zach and Zoe and so on. They're all in great shape. And I'm going to go ahead and run this. And what could possibly go wrong? You think anything's going to go wrong, Brian?
I don't know, Dale. I don't know.
Translation was successful.
Oh,
that's happy. We had 3 records go through. And so I'm just going to take a quick peek at the resulting output. And we'll see if those business licenses that have zeros at their beginning. So I got to go and sort the licenses because stuff has moved around in the database now. So I'm going to go for there we go. Okay, so here's the 00. And yeah, the email is Zed Rake. That would be Zach, I think. But whoa, wait a minute here. Jack, Jasmine, and Josie are still in the game, and yet their email addresses have changed. What has happened? Dun, dun, dun. Well, let's take a look. What did we actually read? What in the world here? If I hit the green button, what I actually see is that I have no values for the first and last name. They're missing. How could that be? And yet, if I look at the original data, which is this button here, there they are. What is going on? If I look over here, I don't know, Brian, what did you do? What kind of tomfoolery is this?
I think you might have a case of schema drift there, Dale.
No, could it be? Let's take a look more carefully. Brian knew that we've had some troubles where those spaces cause us sometimes to be replaced by underscores, as you saw at the beginning. So you must have decided that's it. You've had it with spaces in the column names. Is that what you decided?
Absolutely.
So the workflow just worked, and now we have data we didn't expect. And this, I will say, as one of the founders of SAFE, at the very beginning, Don and I had the policy that data is inherently good. So if anything is the least bit off, clearly we should fail the translation and say we're done. The thing that started to happen is that we realized that lots of our customers' data is actually not good. It isn't exactly to spec. And so it was too harsh to just refuse to do the translation. So we decided instead we would be as forgiving as we can within FME, and then give lots of tools and ways for you to cope with things should you care. And that's an interesting design decision, but that was what we came with after basically being in the field and people being unable to get anything done when their inputs wouldn't work. So if we look over in the translation log, and I know Annabelle's a big fan of filtering the translation log, if I hit this button here, I can see what warnings were there anyway. Okay, and look at this. There it says, the attribute first space name exists on the schema but wasn't found in the file. So we were getting a clue that there was some troubles here, and maybe one day we could graphically show or give some hints, but right now it's in the log. And so what we have is that we're thinking we're reading things with spaces in the names, but indeed we aren't. And so we could fix this. And actually, I'll show that because it's something that folks don't often know. This would be, you know, somehow you found out that this is the problem and you've decided that from now on you're going to have these kind of input files, so it's worth your while to actually fix your workflow by hitting the update reader. So I'm right-clicking on the reader in the so-called navigator pane, and I'm going to update this reader. And I'm going to instead, yeah, there it is. It's pointed to the updated business owners. And if I look in the parameters, I can see that indeed there is no space. And I'm going to say to update both the reader and the feature type, which is our word for the definition that's on the canvas. So if I do this, boom. Now I see these ones have no spaces. And then I have to go kind of old school here and do the mapping. You can also do this with an attribute manager. I don't know, Mark Ireland would have the best practice, but this was the way that the original founders imagined you'd fix this. And you'd connect all these lines. And now I could run this. And now we should be doing that update. And if I go back here and I look at the result, I'm hoping I'm going to see my friends Zach, Zoe, and Zadie. I may or may not have renamed them just to be easy to find. Okay, so let's sort this. And sure enough, there they are. All is well in the universe. And I'm now set up to handle Brian's new data files. So that's the scenario and the way of fixing it if you have to go manual to do it. Now, what if we want to guard against that? And actually, let me just reload while I'm setting up. I'm just going to put things back to their pristine state. If you want to guard against it, we got a couple of moves we can make. One of them is, let's see, I would be up to 2 here. Let's make sure that we never have blank values in here. And so I can use a transformer called the attribute validator. And in here, I basically said, look, I am never expecting there to be an empty value for any of these columns. And if there is, we're going to raise some heck and make sure that we warn people. So it's going to run through the attribute validator. Let's just see, which file do I have this pointed at? Yes, I've got the one that Brian gave me. And so if I have any records that fail, I'm going to go in here. I'm going to pull all those errors into one message. So they come out, the errors come out in this list called FME validation message. Let's actually just go ahead and run this and see. So I'm going to use the run to here business. That runs part of my workflow. There's my failed ones. If I turn on the feature information window, which is this one, okay, select one of these guys. Then let's go over here and take a quick peek. So this record that came out of there should have these, there they are, some validation messages that say things like the first name fails the check. There's just a lot of complaining going on here. So I'm gluing those all into one string. So if I run to here and take a look at the list concatenator's output, I've got something here called all issues. And there you can see I've glued them into a nice run. And I'm going to, if I have any issues at all, I'm just going to say, look, one is enough. So I'm going to use the sampler to say, take only the first one, please. And then we'll send an email to the FME Meister. And then we'll also route that to the terminator. So basically, that will stop this translation before we actually go for the load. And so in the top part of the workflow, I have all the data going through into a feature holder, which is going to stop everything up. And then at the end, if we actually succeed and there's nothing bad happens, and this would let loose and off it would go. Now, to ensure that this is kind of happening after the email, I'm going to route something from the email into the feature holder. I would never want to write this over to here, but I know that I won't because I'm ending the translation. So I'm going to go ahead and run this all the way. And so it errored out. I was scared there briefly when I saw the word a fatal error, but I shouldn't be afraid because it was me that caused it to fail. And I can hop out here and let's see if the FME Meister, FME Meister doesn't have an email. There it is. Okay, and a nice email arrived that says, okay, these things were not having any values. So that's a way of stopping things by checking the content of the data and getting mad if anything is wrong. So that's one technique. The other technique that I think is even more interesting, a little bit trickier to wrap your mind around, but worth the mental effort, is this one here. So here we're going to check and validate the schema. And now to do this, there's a couple of tricks we're going to use. And one of them is, I'm going to go back out to all my input data. Ahead of time, we've made a little CSV file. Let's see, this one here. Yes. That shows what we're expecting in our input. So what I've done is I've taken the metadata, if you like, and put it out. And ahead of this, Mark Stokes mentioned we could have done this using a standard, industry standard XML format. We could put this in a spreadsheet. Heck, you could put this into a database if you want. All we've got is a very simple set of rows. Each of them has the name we're expecting and the native data type we're expecting as well. So that is what we're going to read using this top CSV reader. So if I just run this part, you can see that we've got these. The first name is a string and so on, we got it. The second part is a little bit more wacky, and that uses a reader inside FME called the Schema Reader. Schema, any format. And you can point it at a CSV file, and then you can say CSV, or it just knows it's going to be CSV. And I can go ahead and add this, and it adds exactly that. And so actually I'll delete it because I don't need that one I just added. Yes. And if I run and see what this thing gives me, this gives me something in FME land that we call a schema feature. So I have one row, and it has this FME technique we invented years ago called a list on it, which lets us have many, many things on one. So we see that we've got attribute 0, attribute 1, names and native data types and things. That's what's coming off this schema reader. And this is reading the schema from the input file that Brian gave me, the updated business owners. So if I run that schema into what we call a list exploder, now I have the data type and the names on all of those records. And so these are the first two readers in my panel here. If I click on one, you can see it highlights it, and this one, and it's important that they're the first two because FME will read these in the order that we're going. So we want to do this schema check first before we get to the actual data. And so we come down here, and now I'm going to run these two into a change detector. And I'll invite you, if you want to stay afterwards, Mark Ireland has an interesting way we can do this with an inline query using inline querier transformer using a bit of SQL that I never knew about. So who out there knows what except does in SQL? You can write us and tell us, and maybe we'll send you a spork. But I hope maybe shouldn't have said that. Anyway, we'll run this into a change detector and not an inline querier. And this change detector is basically saying, tell me if there's anything different between the names and data types. And it looks like we have, if I look at the bottom here, 5 things that didn't change, 4 things that were deleted, things that were no longer there that we were expecting, and 4 things that were added, which were these ones without the space. And then the rest of this just goes and writes me a nice report. So I have an attribute creator that says an unexpected attribute was encountered. Those are for the ones that were inserted. This one tells a sad story that we're missing an attribute. And so this then sets up those messages. If I run to here, I jam them all into one feature. So if I, again, look at this, I've got one row and it's got a list with all these messages in it. And then I, again, slam these messages into a single one. So the concatenator then gives me this nice, let's just look, yeah, this nice thing. I actually concatenated them using a carriage return, sorry, a line feed in between. So the separator character is a line feed, and to get that, I had to get in here and do the special characters. So that makes, basically I'm setting up a nice email. And then I'm going to take the result and both email it as well as end the translation. And here I want to make sure that my email goes first. So if I hover over this link, it says execution order 1 of 2. Hopefully you can see that tooltip out there. If I right click on the link, I can say set connection runtime order. I want to make darn sure that we do the email before we terminate. And so that's how I pull that off. And now the bottom part of the flow is basically saying, look, we're going to read things from the CSV. We'll hold on to them just to make sure that the top part completes just fine with the feature holder. And then we're going to go for running the business licenses. And so again, if I look at the business licenses, they should have the Jack and friends. Come on, big business licenses. Yes, there they are. If I go ahead and just run this whole thing, oh, once again, I see that we get the thing failing. I can tell that no data got written to the table. So Jack and friends are still intact. We did not corrupt our data. And if I look over on this side, I can see that data did go to the emailer and so on. And so if I look here, I nervously look to see, oh, I don't know why I didn't get the email to go, but that we won't bother sorting out. That is ominous. Oh, maybe, oh, I know why, because I didn't rerun from scratch. Let's try rerunning the whole workspace from scratch. I might have had it in a strange caching state. Yeah, there we go. So now it ended, and yes, we had the thing not work. And so if I go back here, and yeah, there we go. And here we get that nice message I was expecting. So yeah, the partial run there, I had run everything to this point, and so it was only going to finish up, and that's what goofed me up in my workflow. So that ends that. And so if we hop back to the presentation now, we can kind of see where we came to. And Brian, this might be a time for you to do that DBA work you and I were talking about the other day.
Okay, I'm on it.
Okay.
Let's see what kind of
So
havoc
just while Brian is out wreaking havoc on me, I'm going to just remind ourselves, what was our strategies? Well, one was we can use an attribute validator to check at runtime. And you saw the workflow, and we'll send you these workspaces afterwards to guard. And the second one was validate the schema. So we basically have two things going on in one workspace. We look at the schema part, and then we do our update part as well. Again, we'll send you the workspace for this. So just to recap the whole thing, when something bad happens, now we can either update the reader and refresh the schema like I showed. There's ways in FME you can trace to see where the impacts will be. If any of them reused, the names of attributes no longer there, we got to repair them. Those will be shown as red transformers. Or you can get someone like Brian to just say to fix the input. That's another choice for this kind of situation. Well, what about the other half of this? What if something changes on the output side? And so in that case, we could ask ourselves, what could possibly, again, go wrong? And so I think I'm up to number 5 here in my demos. And so once again, I'm ready to go. This time, let's see what I've got for my input. Yeah, so this is a nice fixed file. I've gone to Brian and said no more spaces, or no more removing the spaces on me. And we're all set with Ava, Alex, and Abigail to do our updates. And on the business table side of things, if we take a quick peek, we can just take a look at the data still being there. And hopefully it shows up in a sec. Again, I'm set to do the update. Yep, okay, so that's good. I see Jasmine and Jack there, so I'm going to go ahead and run this, and we'll get the update to happen. And we should be pretty pleased with our results. There we go. Did it. Looking great. And so let's just take a look and see. We're looking for, I think it was Ava to show up. We should be rid of Jack and Josie. And so I'm just going to, okay, let me get rid of the feature information window here. And we'll sort the licenses. Come on, because it's the 00 ones that we care about. And we got the A rig. Wait a minute. Wait a minute here. There's just a column called name. Brian, what did you do to me?
I think I made some schema changes there, Dale, just to simplify things a little bit.
Well, thanks for that. And so, well, how could we possibly guard against that? So, well, it's a variation. Let's look at number 6 here. What we do is a variation of what we did in the last one. So again, we have a file. This time, my file is of the destination schema we're expecting, and its data types. To read the schema out of a database, I have to use the transformer called a feature reader, and it has a schema port on it. So if I run this, that will go, I can't use the normal FME schema reader because there's nowhere to put the parameters, but the feature reader lets me specify the database I want to read from. And so I can read that schema out and look at it. And once again, if I have this and select, I can see I've got all the people we expect. And then I can run that through the same sort of termination and everything else, and then only do the update if all was well. And so really, I'm using the exact same technique, and I'm going to guard against anything bad happening. And sure enough, I see nothing gets written in this guarded one. If I go out to my email, whoops, if I go out to my email here, let's see, I got another one here. The database fields have changed, and sure enough, it says, oh, okay, this is exactly what Brian did. Is that what you believe, Brian?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, so then I can go and begin repairing. And so how I would repair this, I would go out to here. Actually, there's a writer option that's called update feature types. And I would go out and I would pick just the business licenses table and do this, and it should, yeah, I want to update that one. And boom, now it has updated these records. And now I've got to deal with how am I going to update the name. I probably would put in a concatenator and sort it out here, but that's what I would do. And then I would be, again, friends with Brian, but I might buy him a coffee and say, you know, Brian, next time you could always give me a Slack message before you do that, especially if it's in the middle of a webinar. So let's go back to our story. And yeah, so what are our strategies? Well, there's always the don't worry, be happy strategy, where you just say, well, we are never going to check and we'll see if anybody ever complains. Or maybe we use this technique where we validate the schema before we go for it. And so I've set up now a variety of things when you care and when stuff is quite a bit under your control and you want to make sure you're matching on both ends. But there may be cases where you want to do more garbage in, garbage out, or have other people maintain the schema mappings. And for that, we're going to go to graduate school and hand it over to my friend Brian, who is otherwise known as Mr. Dynamic. Long ago, when Brian first joined SAFE, he wrote a tutorial on this sort of stuff, which you can review afterwards. But Brian, why don't you walk us through the dynamic ways of dealing with this?
All right. Thank you very much, Dale. So I'm going to present my screen here. And what we're going to do is exactly that. We're going to talk about a few strategies for handling this in a more automated way. And the first one is dynamic mode. And so dynamic is a very interesting technique, I think, in FME. It lets you really automate the schema. And in fact, as Dale said, if you don't care and you just want to blast away tables and put whatever data coming into your workflow, you want that schema, you can use that on the writer side. So it's very flexible, and actually it creates a really nice maintenance strategy for yourself because you can handle things after the fact. And so I'm going to jump out. There is a link in this slide to the tutorial, as Dale mentioned, and we'll be sharing all these workflows and the slides as well after the webinar. So let's go here. As an aside, though, for anyone doing black magic DBA techniques, you can use the SQL executors pretty effectively, which is what I was doing behind the scenes there. So that's how I was tripping you up, Dale. Pretty
You got
good.
me, Brian.
Okay, I got you good. So this is an example of a simple dynamic workflow. And what I want to do just very quickly is show you the data coming in. I've changed it slightly from Dale's. So we'll do this. The first first CSV file I'm using has underscores in the names. I'm using lowercase here just to change it up a little bit. But in fact, all of the data is the same business owner tables as Dale was using there. So I'm using one of those, and I have a second table here that has no underscores in the names. So that's the schema drift that we're going to be working with today. So we'll go away from that. And so what I can do is I have a workflow here that can handle both of those files at any time, and it won't make me cry or have to phone my DBA or have to deal with a lot of schema shift stress. So let's see how this works. There's two factors. There's on the reading side, we have our CSV reader. And the magic button here really is this checkbox saying merge feature types. And what this does is it allows any CSV file, you can use an Excel or some different format, but as a CSV file, you can route it through, and we don't actually care about the schema. It will accept anything. And on the writer side, the other little piece of secret business is to turn on dynamic schema definition, which is another checkbox here. And so when you do this, the one thing to think about with all dynamic workspaces is really where are you going to get your schema from? Because what's happening is when you run FME, you are telling the writer to go get the schema from somewhere right at runtime, and that's the schema you're going to use. Unlike what Dale did in a little bit earlier there, where he was defining it on both sides, I don't have to worry about any of that here. It's going to happen all at runtime, not design time. So the setting I'm checking on is just what is my source? Well, in this case, I want to create a mirror image of whatever's coming in to my workspace. So that's what I'm telling it to do. Basically, go to the reader, grab the schema, use that to write the data out. And so we can run this. Here we go. And we'll look at the output first. Give that a second to load and use this handy little viewer to see what's in our table. So I believe in this one, we should have, is it underscores or no underscores? We have no underscores happening. Very good. But if I start to get a different schema coming in from my source, and we can mock that up by picking a different file. So let's get our underscores file. We'll run that. So now completely different CSV files coming in. And when we view this, we've written out that data and that schema. There we go. So once this pops up, we should see underscores and all of our data is there and everything is happy. And I should mention that what setting I'm using here, similar to Dale again earlier, is I'm dropping the table every time I'm writing this data in. So that way I can totally recreate the schema every single time. And that's it. That's really effective. It's a dynamic workflow that really simplifies the schema management. And then you could continue to use this again and again as you go. So I'll step back. That's our dynamic side. So again, you've got this flexibility and ease of maintenance, which in my mind is actually really, really powerful. And now we're going to talk about our design strategy 2. And this is the good one. This technique, in my mind, really lets you handle schema changes on the source or the destination. It can do both for you. And that's because you're going to define the schema externally to FME. And that could be, someone from a different team who's managing the databases. That could be somebody who knows the data really well but doesn't use FME. It's a really powerful way to externalize this and create a strategy for yourself that lets you manage this very, very easily. So again, I really like this for enabling these non-FME users to help you. Again, we've got a great tutorial. It covers many different aspects of this transformer. You can get really deep into this. I kind of picture someone with a big long beard, scraggly beard and lots of hair, or Tom Hanks, I guess, from Castaway after they've left this tutorial. But that is because this transformer is uber powerful. So I'm going to go back to FME. There we go. And we're going to open up second workspace here. So in this case, we're just going to talk about the Schema Mapper. We're not going to talk about dynamic mode, but I will show you an example of both of those together in a minute. So what do we have here? Well, we have a table coming in. Let's take a look at that. And it has no underscores in it. We have a Schema Mapper, which we're going to use to change the attribute names to include a schema, or sorry, an underscore. So we're going to change the actual schema, and then we're going to write it out. And in this case, I should show you that I'm just truncating the existing table because the schema is already set to include those underscores. So what the schema mapping is doing is it's enabling me not to have those errors that Dale had in the morning because my schema exists and I just have to manipulate the data to fit it. And in fact, I just want to talk about the schema mapper quickly. I like to think of it as a bit of a mix of a database joiner. If you take a database joiner and you add an attribute manager to it, I'll draw one of those on the canvas. And then you add, just a little soupçon of a test filter. You get effectively what is the schema mapper. So you're joining quite a number of different transformers together to create this. And I almost want to make a petition. You know, in FME, if you bring a custom transformer down, you get this green style custom transformer or look to it. You'll notice blue everywhere else. You'll get something like that. But what I want to do, let's get a schema mapper on the canvas here, is Dale, I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm thinking of a petition to do this. So we get a custom transformer here and we rename this guy to the Hulk. And this is how it might look on the canvas because I think it is just that powerful. We've got our Hulk
Just
there.
don't want to make it mad.
Yeah, you don't want to make it mad. That is correct. I don't know what it would do to your schema in those cases. But so that's my Hulk. I'm going to use the Bruce Banner version right now. He's not super mad for this example, but you may see some changes in the future if I get my way. But let's run this. Here we go. And I've made a bit of a mess of my canvas, but we'll move those guys up there. And so what we get is the schema mapper, which is going out to a CSV file. I'll show you what the CSV file looks like. I've got it open here. And in here, I'm just defining what does my source look like and what does my destination, what do I want it to look like? And so you can imagine in both cases, this helps you manage schema because you're defining what these two pieces of information look like or you want them to look like. You can ignore this bit on the right. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. So this is our schema table, and how it works is you connect to it in here and then you tell it, what do I want to use those columns for or that information? In fact, you can do all kinds of different things like creating new attributes or changing the feature type name itself. But in this case, we're saying any features coming in with the attribute name first name, change that attribute name to an underscored first name. So you just define that. So it's pretty simple in this example, but extremely powerful. And so what you'll see is in here, I'm now missing these because I've modified those. Those are from the original schema. But if I click on this and look in the feature information window, you'll see that our data actually does exist. So it's there, and then when you write it out, it will put the data into the table in the correct way, and we can see that here. There we go. Again, a really good example, a good technique for just handling this in a more automated fashion. and external to FME as well. So there it is. So we're happy. We've got our data in the database. Life is looking good. But I want to show another example, third example, of how you could do this in a more dynamic way. Because what's happened in this first example here is I've relied upon someone else to ensure that my database is schemaed correctly. I don't know if that's the right term, but is designed in the right way and exists. But in this scenario here, I could actually drop the table and create it completely brand new. And in fact, I can create it using a schema that's completely external to FME. And I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to run this, and then I can explain it a little bit more. Now, on the top, I've got that same merged feature type here. So it's dynamic, any CSV file can come in. We'll ignore this a little bit for a second. And I'm doing the exact same schema mapper. So the data is coming in, I'm changing those old names to new names, and I'm going to write it out. And in the previous example, this was just a truncate because my table was happy, but let's say my table's not happy and I want to blow it away. I can turn this dynamic on and use schema from a schema feature, in this case, to tell it what the schema should be. So the question becomes, like, what is this? What is this schema feature? How do you tell the writer what to use? Well, I have a neat trick to do that. So again, one of those odd odd formats in FME that maybe isn't used as much as it could be. This is a schema from table. And if we open this up, you'll remember those three attributes that I kind of didn't mention a minute ago. That's what I'm using here to build one of those fancy schema lists that Dale used a little bit earlier. So I have a table column telling me what I want to call my schema or the feature type name. The attributes are all defined. We've got that from before because we're using the schema mapper to map to these. And these data types I've also listed in here. So again, this is just living in this fancy CSV file that I have. And I could easily explain to somebody else what these data types are and have them manage this table for me if they're the owner of these sets of data. So I like this because I'm using one file external to FME to really do everything for myself. So what happens coming out of here, we'll just look at it. We get that, again, that fancy list with all the schema defined on it. And so you get things like, here's the IP address with my underscore that I like. And then all I'm doing is I'm taking that list and I'm sticking it on every feature coming through. So each one of these gets its list. The schema mapper changes the actual attributes to match that list, and then the writer writes it out. So if we look at this here, we should get the table completely filled out and happy. And again, if you were to change that CSV file and run this, those changes would get picked up. So it's quite dynamic, quite powerful when you're doing this. And there's our table. And quite pleased with that. So those are two techniques. I will mention that I have a fourth one that we'll put in the upload that makes you not have to do this merging. So for large sets of data, that would be more effective. In that example, I'm just routing the schema feature right to here first, and then all the data comes in, and it's matched up pretty well. So this I'd like to show you because it sort of makes sense to me. You can see where the schema is going, but we do have some more powerful examples that you can take a look at. And with that, let's just wrap up a little recap. Schema Mapper, dynamic, both super great techniques for managing this, getting ahead of schema drift, and really defining your schemas in an automated way. And with that, Dale, I'm going to pass it back to you.
All right, let's see how that works. Here we go, show my screen. All right, so hopefully you're seeing stuff. So the last thing we're going to do is look at how we can use our FME server technology to automate all this so you can have it look after things for you while you're still in bed sleeping. And so to do this, we're going to explore something in FME Server called automations. So what's the definition? In FME Server, automations are graphically created workflows that can run one or more steps in response to something happening. So that's what they are. It's a way of gluing things together. And so what's our strategy here then? Well, you saw my examples earlier where I had some kind of validation stuff in the same workspace as the actual data load. And so if we're going to use an automation strategy, we can actually break things apart into more like, actually Carl von Stetten gave a talk about microservices and FME. So we're going to break, you can get that from our FME World Tour virtual if any of you are interested. But we'll break apart the work into a set of workspaces, one that's going to validate the source, one that's going to validate our destination schema, and then we'll run those back to back. And if all is well, then we'll finally do the actual load. And so that's what we're going to do. Here's what these look like. So really, again, it's that same validation workflow, but then at the bottom, we do the check, and we use this custom transformer from FME Hub, which basically says if anything comes in, remember, only bad things are coming in here. So if all is well, nothing will come in. If anything comes in, then it's bad, and we will go and warn the automations framework that the source schema was bad. If nothing came in, then that's our sign that the source schema was okay, and we'll send it out that way. So I'm just going to hop into Workbench for a sec, and that's what's going on here. This glue between Workbench and FME Server is this thing called the automations, FME Server automations writer, and that's how you create these little outputs. And so I'll do that, and then I would go ahead and I would publish this workspace to FME Server, and I did that ahead of time, and I would walk through and it would get up there. I'd also have a similar workspace to validate the destination schema. And again, I would say the destination schema is okay or bad. And then lastly, I have an actual database update workspace, which has almost nothing in it. And so I have uploaded all these to my FME server, so we can hop out of here. And let's go over to the automations in FME server. And I will not make this automation from scratch. I'll just show you what it is. So basically, I had gone and dragged out a trigger, and then in here, I double click it and I say, whenever a file arrives. So when a directory was modified, when a file arrives, then I will do something. So I'll just delete this guy off of here. So that's this directory watch is going to watch for a file to arrive. Then we're going to run that workspace. I dragged out an action tool to run a workspace, and that's the one to validate the source schema. If all was okay, then we'll validate the destination schema. And indeed, if that was just fine, then lastly, we'll actually do the data load. So, so that's how we're going to run this. Now, right now, this automation is not running. I got to just double check. How often am I checking? I'm going to poll every 4 seconds, which is kind of aggressive, but for demo purposes, that's fine. I'm going to start this automation. Oop, there it goes. So now this automation is out there running. And now if I go to my files and connections, and in the, I've set it to watch this directory. I could have it watch any directory in my organization, but I'm watching this directory here. And so if I take this updated business owners file, this is Zachary and Zoe with no spaces, which is bad. So I'm going to just take and upload this file. I dropped it in there, it uploaded it. Now I nervously wait for it to wake up. Let's take a look at the jobs here. Nothing going on the jobs. There's nothing queued, nothing running. Oh, validate source schema ran today. Looks like nothing else did. Let's see what the Meister has to say. So 8:56, which is right now, it is saying bad things. So it didn't do its job, which would mean that nothing got changed in my database. Let me just double check. I'm going to hop back out to here. Let's grab this one so I can, this is my easiest way to see what's in the database. it should still be the Josie and company, the Jack and so on, the ones start with J. So let's just make sure that they're there. Yeah, Jasmine and friends are there. And so next then, let's go to the fixed business owners where Brian actually gave me a file with the right names. And I'm going to go and add those to my resources. So I'm going to drag these in. And I mean, triggers, this could be a file arriving in Dropbox or something being emailed. We even have one where you drag a file into a Slack channel and it runs this and gives you the results back. That can be done. So we just did the fixed owners. Let's take a look at our jobs yet to see if anything good has happened. The validate destination just happened and the source. Let's see if I go again here. Let's look at, and the database update seems to have happened at 8:57, which means it's almost closing time. So if I go back here and I reload, with any luck at all, we should see my cousin's kids, Zach and Zoe. That really are my cousin kids' names. Okay, Zach and Zoe, let's see. Get rid of this, sort the license numbers alphabetically. Sure enough, Zoe and Zach are where they're supposed to be along with their friend Zadie. And so that means that the automation happened. It guarded against bad data and it let the good data go through. And so this is happy news. And of course, we could be sending Slack messages and who knows what all else from that. And so, yeah, that's the automation magic that pulls this all together. I was just doing this with an FME cloud machine that Brian set up, but of course you can run FME server in your own places. So I think actually, Annabelle, are you the closer?
Yes, I am. I mean, I don't feel necessarily like we have to change presenters. We can,
Sure.
but
Okay.
you can click if you feel like it's time to book.
Okay.
Actually, you know what? I'll do it for the sake of consistency here. Show my screen. There we go. So thank you, Dale, for showing us how you can leverage automations in FME server to handle schema drift in an automated fashion. It really is a straightforward process to set this up. I tried it myself and I could figure it out in less than 10 minutes, so that's a good sign. But to wrap up our story this morning, I really wanted to reiterate that every tip and trick that we shared today are all oriented towards making sure your workflow is reliable, resilient, and robust. Let FME keep your data on track and do the schema drift checking and handling for you. Save yourself the headaches and the debugging time. And as always, we just like to point out that we have a ton of free resources available for you. If this webinar resonated with you this morning and you'd like to learn more about this topic, about FME in general, or talk to us about anything FME related, we'd love to hear from you. We believe in fully supporting our customers as they solve their challenges. We have the FME community, which is great for how-to questions, engaging with other safers, and submitting new ideas. We also have free training live online at a regular schedule, but also on demand. So there are recorded sessions and resources there. And if you have any technical problems or you would like to submit a support case, if you're a current user of FME, it's very straightforward. We have live chat as well as a support forum. But when in doubt, ask us. We love to help our customers with any step in their journey. And there's always a quick blurb at the end about licensing options. We provide flexible options for every size of deployment with 3 main pricing options for our customers: perpetual licensing for FME desktop and server, as well as a pay-as-you-go model for FME cloud, which is our cloud deployment of FME server. And for organizations that have larger deployment needs, we also offer subscriptions and ELAs. So for any other information about that, again, feel free to contact us through live chat or head over to safe.com/pricing and we'd love to chat. And with that, thank you all again for joining us this morning. I hope that we've provided some valuable tools and playbooks for handling schema drift in FME that you can use in your own workplaces. We'll probably stick around for a couple minutes after this presentation to let your final questions roll in. And as a reminder, we will be sharing the workflows we showed today so that you can try them out on your own. And we will all try to respond to any remaining unanswered questions via email follow-up if we didn't get to them today. So if there's anything else anyone else would like to add in the presenter panel, feel free to go ahead.
So yeah, we might as well put the cameras back on.
I turn mine back on. I would say too, for Dale's examples, you could pair that with dynamic. You could use automations with dynamic and the schema mapper. Just because you can't see the attributes, there are neat tricks like exploding out the attributes would allow you to use all of that together. And that would be really a powerful example. We didn't mock it up for today, but I think you could easily do that.
Yeah, I mean, today we were really, this is kind of, anytime we're into the meta level, the metadata level, it gets a little bit more tricky. And so we tried really hard to keep our examples pretty simple, but you can sure see, I'm imagining how you can build upon this to do some extremely powerful things. And we've definitely seen customers out there do that. I think, is it called a cross tab or a crosswalk table? Is that?
Yeah, Mark's on the line.
The crosswalk.
That's how he describes it, for sure.
Yes, so we've definitely seen that in sort of major data migrations, people maintaining and building this massive Excel spreadsheet of mappings, and then basically applying them on the fly. I've seen people that have run a workspace across a directory of thousands of CAD files to pull out all the names of layers that are there, and then they see things like streets, roads, rails, whatever, and then they build a mapping for all those variations, plural or not, to the one that they want, and then apply this type of technique to that.
Wow. It's a Wild West.
So we only had one person that wanted to talk about accept, and I see that some people maybe thought I said accept. No, accept is a way with a SQL where you can basically put two SQL statements back to back and put the word accept in the middle, and it basically removes the results of the second query from the first. And that way you can actually get the list of the fields that are new or deleted if you use that type of technique as well. Yes. Yeah, accept compares to selects. Thanks, Michael. And yeah, John from Arizona was the first to flag that. Any other questions that people thought were interesting? Any of the marks, do you have anything to weigh in?
I have a question for my own self. I couldn't remember why we picked this car theme.
Oh,
oh no. Actually, no, I think I'll let Dale explain this, but okay, so when I heard schema drift, the first thing that popped into my mind was Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift.
Oh.
And so I was thinking about cars drifting around corners, and so it just loosely translated to a car theme. If you go to Dale's Twitter, you can see my homemade Photoshop, not probably licensed in any way, of how we advertise this webinar in the social media.
There was a rogue tweet that had that on it. But yeah, that was the thing, because, you know, what could be more sort of exciting and adrenaline pounding than schema drift?
Nothing gets your blood pumping faster than the schema change.
People seem to like it. We have some comments, people being like, it's a great theme.
Oh, good.
One question we did have was, could we do the same thing for attribute types, data types, as well as names?
Yes. So I think
we can.
Sure. Like in my examples, I actually was comparing types because my sort of external schema definition had both the name and the type in it, and so it would flag it if Brian would have gone and changed from text to float, for example, that would have been flagged. And I think, Brian, your examples, you can put types into those tables as well.
Yeah, I could see you putting types into the tables. You could even do some funky things with the list, the schema list, and change those and compare those as well. That would be interesting too. So yeah, definitely options there.
And I think
someone asked if it was case sensitive as well, and I think in most parts it is. I don't know if my SQL one would be or not. I don't know if SQL's case sensitive, but
I think if you're asking for things, I think by default it would be sensitive if you're actually comparing data inside of SQL, but the column names tend not to be case sensitive for your actual query when you're writing it.
Okay.
Unless you quote them. This varies from database to database and can be kind of a bit of a headache. Yeah, that's what Mitchell just said, that SQL's case sensitivity depends on the server. Yeah.
Yep, that's right.
Depends on which Brian you have in your organization. Which DBA.
Troublemakers.
And somebody's asking, Yaroslav is asking, Brian, could you set up Schema Mapper that was ready for many different inputs to map to one output?
Yeah, so in the Schema Mapper, there's a filtering component. So I could see you filtering by different fields and then using that filter, so that would allow you to group things together in that schema table. So then you could do things where you have multiple tables in your workspace and you're actually affecting each of those differently. That filtering, there's a really good example in the tutorial of that, so check that out.
And I think you also could set it up, like, let's imagine that we want road name as our output. You could have 3 or 4 fields that all map to road name, and then whatever wanders by would just hit and go.
Yeah, in fact, so that's exactly right. So if it encounters road name, it'll map it. And then if it encounters the next version of that, it'll map it. So it really depends on the data coming in and the order of what you put into that schema mapper table.
I mean, kind of we're in the overtime, and I will just mention that we know, and Mark Stokes is kind of quietly nodding in the back here, that the Schema Mapper is in need of another round of love. Like it is a very powerful tool, and this is, I think it's probably its 3rd iteration in FME right now, and it probably is time for Annabelle to add it to the list.
Yes,
somewhere.
I mean, honestly, selfishly, from my perspective, if you have any particular shortcomings that have been bugging you for some time, please do send them in through the ideas page, or shoot us an email, and it would actually help us quite a bit in determining what would make the Schema Mapper even more excellent in its next rebirth.
There's
Actually,
talk in the chat about parameterizing where that CSV file is. I think that would be quite a neat technique as well.
Yeah. Actually, someone has just asked a really great question. Is there a maximum number of rows and columns that the software can handle? So in terms of columns, now I admit the examples we did today were very kind of toy examples, 100 rows with a handful of columns. But I have seen FME handle literally 1 million columns. It was evil data that we generated, so there's no practical limit on the columns. But we wouldn't want our friends to do that sort of thing. But in terms of the number of rows, we've also seen, I've seen translations that have literally billions go through. We've done a lot of work in modern times to try to make FME really fast, especially for CSV input to do things. We call that bulk mode. And so we're really working hard and working through FME so that huge volumes go through even an order of magnitude faster than they used to. But practically, I mean, Mark Ireland, what's the longest you've heard of a translation running?
Well, several days I've heard running,
Yes.
but I mean, that's not ideal, but I don't necessarily know that there's a link. Sorry, I'm just answering questions at the same time. I don't think there's necessarily a limit to the number of rows, depending on how you process it. And we always recommend just doing a test first on, say, a few hundred thousand rows, just to get the performance optimized and then let it loose on the entire data set.
It also is good if there's some way to partition the input, and then you can use FME server to run things in parallel. So to the customer that's asking about the maximum number of rows, often if you can divide it up, run it in parallel, that's a way to get more throughput as well. I know there's people doing big bulk migrations that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
It's been fun. This is a good one. I think this is a
thanks
great.
for all of your questions. It makes it interesting after the fact to kind of listen to what thoughts come to mind as you're listening to our examples. But yeah, like I said, we'll follow up with any unanswered questions after the fact and submit the workspaces. And with that, Steph, happy?
I think we're done. That's awesome. I'll mention too that next week we're doing a webinar on CAD and GIS on Wednesday at the same time. Dale, you're going to be presenting with Jovita, so that'll be a great one for people to tune into as well. And if you check safe.com/webinars, we're going to have a lot of upcoming webinars, especially in this time, so you can stay connected with us there.
And I think somebody's asking about if they wanted to do some training. We do lots of free training online. Do you know, Stephanie, when the next ones are, or Mark?
I think there was a server one underway right now. It might not be too late for you to join. What day is it? Wednesday? Okay, wait. If you go safe.com/training, we have, okay, the next introduction to FME desktop takes place on May 20th. So there's plenty of time to sign up for that. I'll chat it out.
So Cynthia, for sure, you'll want to sign up for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's a great one. It's a nice short course that really gets you into the usability of FME quite quickly. So 3 hours, I believe, 4 hours course.
We'll include it in a follow-up email as well. And you guys will get a link to the slides and recording. And I think, are we sharing out any of the workspaces?
Yes.
Yeah,
Awesome.
for sure.
Yeah, that was a question too. So everyone will get an email with all of the things.
Send them all the things.
All the things.
Yeah. I'd say too, if there's any questions or you want to discuss some of the examples, come to the community and post there, and we'd be happy to follow up publicly there with everyone as well. It'd be fun.
Awesome. Cool. All right, with that, I'm going to kill my webcam, and then we'll leave it running for a couple more minutes if anyone has a last question, but we're going to be offline. So thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.